Okay, and we are live. Hello at GMAT Club, everyone joining us on YouTube and Facebook. We are excited for a student panel today to kind of discuss the MBA costs, and we're gonna go at it from a couple different angles. I know we're in some interesting times right now, so this is definitely a different scenario than a lot of people may have thought of before taking their MBA. So we're going to look at maybe what their expectations were coming into the program, how have those changed over time, and maybe some tips for the prospective students. But first off, I do want to start off with some introductions. First off, my name is Brendan Kelly. I am one of the GMAT Club moderators, and I will be hosting the session, asking some of the questions. So please make sure you're typing in some questions that you have in the comments, and I will also make sure to try to get those out. But Mark, I'd love to go ahead and get you started. Maybe give us some background, what you did previous to the MBA, and what you're doing now, and maybe what your prospects are for the future.
Sure. Thank you, Brendan. It's great to be here. I hope everyone is safe and well along the line. Thank you for joining us. I'm here on behalf of the Rotman School of Management. I'm a second-year MBA student. Prior to my MBA, I was an engineer. I worked in oil and gas, a bit of aerospace. And since doing my MBA, I've kind of transitioned to a finance path. And I'm entering kind of the investment banking industry. And yeah, that's about me. And I'm happy to be here today. I'll pass it on to Emma.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks, Brendan. My name is Emma Sapat, and I am a second-year student at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. Prior to my MBA, I was working in government in Washington, D.C., which was great. I loved financial services, which was the industry I was looking at regulating, but I was looking for a place where things moved just a little bit quicker and with somewhat less bureaucracy, and that led me to pursuing my MBA program. And I knew I wanted a school that was super close-knit and had a really good general foundation for the business side of things. So I ended up at Tuck, and then I worked my summer internship at Capital One, which is a bank, and I'll be returning there after business school.
My name is Zach Fallon. I went to University of Colorado Boulder, where I did finance and real estate. I worked in private equity doing commercial real estate acquisitions for a few years. And kind of had a coming to values moment where I decided I would never serve. I was getting too old and it was time to do it. So I joined the military, spent about 6 years in, most of that with the 75th Ranger Regiment. And then when I got out, applied to Columbia's MBA program, where I just spent my first year. And I'm currently involved in private equity again, doing sustainable energy infrastructure in the Caribbean. And I think there will be a plug along with the vet mention. I just got a chat message for the Columbia specific Military and Business Association. I know we're going to talk about a lot today, but if you're a veteran out there and you have specific concerns relative to your GI Bill and how that functions, please do feel free to reach out to me via that link. And now I will pass it off to.
Hey, thank you. So I'm Hendrik de Ruyter. I'm a second-year MBA at NYU. Before Stern, I spent 5 years in financial services based here in Manhattan, so staying in New York. This past summer, I worked at a search fund, and going forward, recruiting for rotational leadership programs. So excited to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you all for giving your introductions. And I think I'd like to get us started with just kind of looking at the overall picture. So as you were filling out your applications to these schools, at what point did you really start considering the actual financial aspect? I know that's probably something you immediately started thinking is, okay, I'm most likely going to have to incur this cost. But when did those, when did those thoughts really start to materialize to where you went pen and paper, okay, how do I do this? And maybe what are some tips do you have for people who are starting that process and maybe don't even know where to start? And I'll hand it off to whoever wants to jump in, and we can go from there.
Yeah, I could start us off. I think for me, going through the process, I think as I thought about schools that I wanted to apply to, I was living in New York. I live with my wife here, and when I was looking at schools, I knew I could go anywhere, potentially go anywhere across the country. But having that conversation with my wife, it's like, let's look in New York first and then everywhere else. So I was looking at a lot of New York-based schools, and of course you look at the bills as you start to apply. But I think for me, especially with all these schools that are so competitive, I knew the costs were going to be large, but I focused first on just trying to get in. And then once I once I was further down the process and was into a school that I was excited about, that's when I really started, figuring out how I was going to fund it.
Fantastic. And I'll come to Zachary in a second, because I know you have a bit of a interesting situation that I want to hit on. But for Emma and Mark, after you did receive your admits, what were kind of the first steps you took to start that planning process? Did you reach out to your schools? Did you kind of just start planning it all on your own? What were your first steps?
Yeah, I can talk through that. I think once I got over the initial excitement, I was immediately like, how am I going to pay for this? And I think one thing I'll say is, if you are admitted to an MBA program and you want to go, you should be able to model out your expenses and your loan costs against, take a look at the numbers for your school. They all post what their average graduate salary are, and some of them can be quite granular. So that's what I ended up doing. I looked at the kinds of things I was interested in doing after business school, took a look at some of the salary data from the schools that I got into on how people did, and then modeled it out and said, okay, I can pay this off in maybe this amount of time, or this is the optimistic scenario, this is the pessimistic scenario. And then I evaluated whether that was something I could live with. For me specifically, it turned out initially I couldn't. I was coming off of a government salary, and I hadn't been in the workforce as long as some other people applying to business school had. And so I ended up prioritized schools where I got scholarship aid, and that made a significant difference when I was looking at my model about, with this, it actually becomes a amount of risk in a scenario of future payoff I'm really comfortable with. So that was how I thought about it.
Fantastic. And Mark, does your experience kind of go with that too?
I kind of like what Emma talked about, modeling and kind of getting a clear picture of what the financial costs are. And it's funny, at Rotman in our first finance course, the thing they ask you to do in your first day is calculate the net present value of an MBA and kind of what your return will be. And I think that's a good way to think of it. And what I remember from that exercise is, this talk is on kind of the hidden cost of an MBA, and some of the hidden costs that kind of spoke out to me were, one is the opportunity cost. If you're currently working in a job, and if it's a high paying job, and if you forego your salary to go study, you're losing between 1 to 2 years of salary. Those are real costs. And a second one, for international students, I'm a Canadian myself, and if you're going to America, the FX, the exchange rate is quite significant. And so if you were to go to American school and you cannot secure a visa and you have to come back to Canada, your debt can multiply overnight. Paying back a US denominated debt in Canadian dollars is very challenging to do. And I think the third one too, and this is something Hendrik kind of spoke to, was the relocation cost. If you have to move, I think Hendrik was in New York, or going anywhere, if you have to sell, your condo or sell your mortgage and kind of relocate, those are costs. So those are kind of three things that spoke out to me, were the opportunity cost of leaving your job, potential FX cost and risks if you're an international student, and the third one is just relocation costs. So they're not directly tied to tuition, but they certainly affect the whole cost of an MBA within your model.
Fantastic. That's great feedback, Mark. And I'd like to touch with Zachary real quick as well, speaking specifically from a military experience, as it's definitely a unique perspective there, and one I don't know much about. So Zach, I'd love to hear your kind of advice and maybe experience, and maybe give a plug to some of the conversations you've had with other veterans for this planning process, and maybe some advice for any veterans that are watching on this YouTube platform now.
Sure. And if I ever miss anything in these responses, please feel free to poke me and I'll circle back around. But I also love what Emma said about kind of looking at what you're setting yourself up for career-wise. It's not the only answer, but it's a very common reason for pursuing your MBA in the first place, is a pivot to a different professional domain. So you should have perhaps some gauge of at least what your goal salaries are there, and then you can do the MPV like Mark said. But honing it into a veteran specific, obviously, assuming you had an honorable discharge, a lot of you will be coming out with one of two options. Speaking, and I was enlisted. So for those of you that know what that means that you'll get your GI Bill. And just for those of you that are looking at the GI Bill option, just be considerate that there is a cap on that, and you'll need a way to bridge the financing gap between your school's tuition and the GI Bill money. And so with that, something to be cognizant of, and that's something I wasn't entirely tracking beforehand, but definitely worked out in my favor, is your school's individual scholarship deadlines. That is definitely a solution for everybody, but specific to veterans too, there's a lot of merit-based, and they're specifically targeted to bridge that financing gap. So definitely keep that in mind. I know I can only speak towards Columbia, but our scholarship deadline is somewhere at the beginning of January. So you want to have your application in by the beginning of December if you're also hoping to have a more competitive chance at those scholarships. And so the other program that's available to veterans that I think less people action and maybe more on the officer side is called vocational rehab. And what vocational rehab is, just oversimplifying things entirely, is essentially you can reach out to the organization and create this basically a pitch for why you need this money, this funding right now, and they'll essentially pay for your school. And a great thing to know about the vocational rehab is it actually can be used on top of the GI Bill. So if you're someone who has a really long kind of pipeline ahead of you, like perhaps an MD, MBA, something like that, you might want to look at doing the vocational rehab and then utilizing your GI Bill for the remainder of your education, or vice versa.
Fantastic. I mean, that was a great response. I feel like we can almost title this how to properly use your GI Bill to go to MBA school now. So no, that was great. Thank you so much. So I'd like to kind of instead, we won't go round robin for every question, but I would like to kind of talk about what are the differences between the first year and second year costs that you've noticed. And I think you're probably going to be the most unique class to ask, as your first year may have been a little bit different than this year. So has it drastically changed at all? And how is that affecting how you're planning your own finances? Whoever wants to take it can jump right in. Or I can call on someone too. That works.
Yeah, I don't mind jumping in here. So speaking on behalf of Rotman, prior to entering the MBA, your costs are fixed for the duration of your program. So there was no change in cost, but the Rotman School of Management did respond to COVID by offering a technology grant to support any added technology you would need to complete the program, being online. And so they did provide a grant. So in terms of entering the MBA, the costs are fixed and defined, but that change between first year and second year varies based on the electives you're taking. There's some minor costs with individual course packs you have to pay for, but those are quite insignificant when compared to the cost of tuition.
Okay, and I'd also like to throw in here too, there's kind of a second question, but I'd like to use it to build on that last question. And that's what about the cost outside of tuition? So I know there's of course the tuition, which is fixed, and you can kind of get a good grasp on, but there are a lot of things that people don't always take into consideration, whether you're going out with your classmates to grab a drink late at night, you're always going out to eat or something like that maybe you didn't consider in the original finances. Has that stacked up? Have you tracked that? And then once again, is that something that's changed from the first or second year? I know everything's virtual, so maybe you are spending actually less this year because you're not going out so much. I'm curious to see what everyone's thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I think I agree with a lot of what was just said. In terms of sort of trackable expenses or things that you wouldn't necessarily think of, I would say a lot of them are going out costs, travel costs, and they definitely have changed in the world of COVID, where there are just, I think the biggest one that was probably the most significant unanticipated expenses, travel, to go on trips with your classmates, and that's shrunk a lot, both because people don't want to travel right now for understandable reasons, and what travel there is takes place a lot closer to home, and that means there aren't expensive plane tickets. I will say how I thought about this during my first year was sort of creating a general budget for incidental expenses and then trying to pay for things out of that, and just making sure that in the rush to sort of want to participate in something, I didn't exceed what was actually reasonable for me when I was thinking about it in a rational moment versus in a moment of, oh no, FOMO, everyone's going to go and I won't get to go. in terms of things that Tuck has done, just with regards to fees and the part of it that they have control over, they have refunded student activities fees, since obviously those aren't being used to put on in-person events as much, and they're going to reimburse unused dining fees. I will say, like, a lot of the time you see allowances for books and materials, and one thing that I thought has been really great is through the library at Tuck, they've been making digital versions of materials available for mostly free. So I haven't actually had to buy a textbook yet this term, which has been great. And I hope that that continues on into the future.
Fantastic. And does anyone else have anything to add on that one?
I think I can add just a little about some other costs, and ones that, you know, are kind of implied, but that you might not be thinking about on the front end. I thought the point about moving was a great one, but once you're actually in the program, social is such a crucial component to the MBA experience. And that's a great thing. But at the same time, it does come at a price. And so expect fees for social events that run pretty frequently. And then also club fees, at least at Columbia, when you go to join the club, of which there's about 100 plus. Some clubs will indeed be free, but others will come with like a nominal fee of around $50 to $100 per semester or per year. I'm not exactly sure. So there will be a lot of these kind of little added costs on the side. And then just speaking to what, since we were talking about with other schools, some of the programs that Columbia has, given the COVID environment, is similar grants. I know they have financial aid grants specifically for scholarship, and then they're also doing some that are just pure emergency funding for any students that are in need. So those considerations have absolutely been present throughout the administration and the program this year.
Fantastic. And this isn't actually a question that's posted, and it kind of deviates from the MBA cost. I guess we could call it an emotional cost, if you will. But I am curious, because Hendrik did mention that he consulted his wife when deciding a program. I'm curious if any of you have partners, and maybe how that's affected your MBA experience in terms of maybe them having to adjust their work life, or what that's done from a financial perspective between you and your significant other. Is that something that a lot of people get nervous about when they're applying, is how to make that work from a moving both of you down there, or maybe even spending some time apart? I'm just curious to see if anyone has had some unique perspectives there.
Yeah, I think I can lead off with this. One minor point on the last question too. One thing that I didn't expect is if you're planning to attend any conferences or anything like that, it goes along the lines of travel, but the travel of getting there, and then potentially the fee of joining a conference that you might be interested in for a networking side. And then so to move on to the next one, I think for me and my wife, and I had a son in this middle of the summer, so right in between my 2 years of MBA. So
congratulations.
Thank you. Talk about added costs in the middle, but I think from the relationship side, and I'm sure a lot of people have experienced this, but it comes down to a lot with time. So my wife and my wife's luckily on maternity leave right now. But when you're in an MBA program, even virtually, you just are spending the majority of your time either with classwork or networking or recruiting. And it can become very, it can become difficult to make sure you're making time for other relationships that are important in your life. So there's a lot of time, and there's a lot of different activities and people pulling you in different directions. But I'm just trying to make sure you balance that correctly, and it's just difficult because you're in an MBA for a short amount of time, so you want to make sure that you're maximizing it while you're there.
That's a fantastic point. Once again, congratulations. And but no, that's fantastic. Does anyone else have any additional pointers on that? Anything that they've experienced?
I can come just give a little confidence, hopefully, to the low ballers out there. Me transitioning out of the military, my fiance was actually also graduating from undergrad, so both just coming with no jobs. And sure, there is money that comes in from the military paying for school, but just to hopefully give some perspective towards what it's like finding a job in New York City. It was about a month-long, very intense search, and being on site absolutely helped. But everything, and I've seen this kind of play out with other my peers and their significant others, is that it does take about an intense month of work. Month or two seems to be the timeline, and being on site wherever your school of choice is does seem to help. And this may be unique to New York City just by the turnaround here, but it can be done. It's okay to go in blind. You just have to be really, I think, prepared and motivated to deal with those obstacles that will come at you very fast.
Sure, that's once again fantastic advice there. And then so we do have a question from Victor that I would like to pull up, just asking if anybody looked for financing with the current company that they were at. Is that something that you pursued, or was this? I know some of you may have been career changing. So if that's all of you, then we can move on to a different question. But I'm curious if anybody explored that route at all.
So I actually did explore that route, and typically when a company is financing an MBA, there's a stipulation involved where you have to return to work at that company for a few years. And so I believe when I was looking into it, I saw the range, depending on the company, between 20 to 40%. Obviously, those are anecdotal numbers and vary, based on the company. But the thing really that, obviously, if you're looking to transition, you're looking to try a different company, not go back to the same one. So yeah, I do think though, like that's certainly a great option to consider if you're looking to return to that company. But that's typically what they bake into the terms, is having to return and work there for X amount of time.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's great feedback. I knew it was a specific question, so I'm glad we actually got a response there. There's an additional question addressed maybe to Hendrik, but I mean, Zach, I think you could also provide some feedback here, and then even Emma and Mark and where you're staying at currently. They're asking was there any additional cost while living in New York City that you needed to consider, just because it's such a high cost of living? Are there nuances to finding housing that you even maybe needed to take out a specific loan for? I know maybe living in New York City is going to be different than Charlottesville or even up in Hanover. So curious what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm sure Zach can attest to it. Like living in New York City can be a challenge from the expense wise, but there are ways to try and lessen those costs. So a lot of people will look to finding roommates. Me and my wife live together in a 1-bedroom, so that helps a lot cost wise. And then also New York City, you can live in outer boroughs. So depending on where your campus is, other boroughs outside of the city are options with people living in Jersey City or Brooklyn, and it helps those costs come down a little bit. And then maybe unexpected costs of the city, things like you might have to get a subway card to get around, or maybe take a city bike. But so like those things, there's options to try and cut your costs. If you don't want to take the subway, then maybe you could take a bike, and that'll be an option for you. So it's just like anything, there's challenges, but there's ways to overcome it and make it, I'm not going to say cheap, but at least doable.
Sure. And then Zach, Emma, Mark, were there any other tips maybe you have for cost of living challenges, or maybe just some of those other extraneous expenses too?
Yeah, one thing I would say on this is that, yeah, moving to Hanover was a lot cheaper than living in Washington, D.C. In terms of the space I could get for the amount of money that I had to pay. And I'm sure it's even more that way for New York. The only thing, to balance that out, and to be fair, I think the only thing that can be maybe a surprise additional cost when you live in a more rural area, or like Hanover, or farther away from public transportation, is you may need to think about, like, do I want to have a car? I am kind of a bad example of that, because I have lucked out in terms of having friends and roommates that like driving and are willing to drive. And I have always lived in places that were close to school and enjoyed walking. So it's totally doable, in my opinion, to live and be a Dartmouth student for 2 years and never have a car. But it's something you evaluate based on how much you feel like you want to be mobile and to get out of this town a little bit more easily.
Sure. And then for those who maybe don't know on the watching right now, has there been a cost associated with recruiting? I know for consulting specifically, recruiting starts, the second you step on campus your first year. So I know, of course, with the current situation, a lot of things are virtual. So that, of course, cuts any travel costs. But just for maybe those who are unfamiliar with the recruiting process, were there any hidden costs or costs you weren't aware of when it comes to really marketing yourself and trying to recruit into where you want to end up?
Well, so this is from a classmate of mine that went through the consulting recruiting. But one thing that that I didn't expect and didn't know was an option, but basically through his first year, the consulting recruiting didn't go as he expected, and when he re-recruited in his second year, he wanted to make sure he had as good a chance as possible. And there's actually services that act as like guidance counselor is the wrong word, but like a consultant for your consultant recruiting process. So like, outside of the Career Center, also making sure specifically for the firms he was going for to help him sharpen up his resume and prepare better. And so that was kind of an unexpected cost that I saw through my experience.
That's interesting. That's a good point. And Zach, it looked like you were about to say something too.
Yeah, so this one I don't have a ton to offer on, but I will say the club fees that I mentioned before, for instance, for the consulting prep clubs, that's a consideration, but it's typically only about $100. And then obviously making sure you have a nice suit, specifically if you're looking at more of the kind of stricter pipelines such as investment banking, where the expectation is suit and tie for your coffee chats. And in this day and age, obviously things have changed. Maybe you can get away with just buying a jacket, suit and tie, and then just keeping it on Zoom. But that's one option. And then the reason I wanted to hop on this one too is just to mention for New York too, that consideration right now is that the housing market's unique there, and that there's typically a lot of turnover. So, having a month to find a place is not unreasonable. But also along with that, given the COVID environment right now, you're actually in a great position to lock in really great rates, not taking away from the difficulty of the time. So, but just another consideration for those looking at New York, since that was a specific question.
And that's actually a really good point, Zach, that I'd like to kind of reemphasize as well. So when looking for housing, that's kind of maybe even for people who have been accepted to early admit, they already know where they're going right now. Is there, in your experience and what you've seen, is there like a best time to start farming the market where the rates are at their lowest? I know there's going to be difference between apartments, which are generally more standardized, and then maybe Emma up in Hanover, you're even able to find some things on Zillow where people are just renting out their houses. I'm just curious what you've seen and maybe how and when these candidates should really start looking for housing. Emma, go for it.
Yeah, I did want to say one of the interesting and unusual things about Tuck is because it's not in a city. In the first year, you have the opportunity to live in what's essentially a building that's only Tuck students. I wouldn't really call it a dorm because it's not like you share bathrooms or space with anyone else. It's really like you have a studio apartment in a building where all the other studio apartments are Tuck students. And that's really nice. It's a little bit pricier versus finding housing in the general Hanover housing market, but you weigh the proximity to being next to all of your classmates and colleagues and having easy access to school facilities against some of that added cost. In terms of when I started looking for housing, I took a while to make up my mind. I didn't immediately accept my admissions offer, so I think it was a little bit late in the year. And I know there are people that jumped on the housing thing really fast, and then some people waited even longer over the summer. It depends on how volatile the real estate market you're looking at is in terms of apartment hunting. But one of the nice things, like you said, is up here, because there's so many big houses, it's very possible to find people that are just renting out their entire nice Hanover large house. And especially second year students tend to like those apartments where you'll have several second years all living together in a shared house, which is great. And it's a really fun atmosphere.
That's great. Thank you, Emma. And then either Mark or Zachary Hendrick, do you have any feedback on the housing market in either New York or wherever? I know, Zach, you were kind of saying right now, I'm sure rates are pretty low, as I know I've heard, at least from the articles I've read, a lot of people are moving out of the city. So you may be able to kind of scrounge bottom low rates. But are any other points there? Or should we move on to a different question?
Yep. Just to add on that, if the world does become the optimistic future that we hope, and the rental rates do seem to climb back by the time you're looking at housing, that's when it certainly obviously can get competitive. I'm in student housing, so I'm sure we can talk more about that later and what that process looks like. But just a tip that was given to me when I was getting kind of towards the deadline there to find a house is just that if you do have that kind of flexibility with a move-in date, especially if your program is virtual or something you might consider is as Brendan said, looking at what those busy times are for turnover. And so coming in at the month of August, obviously right before school starts in the neighborhood where your school's at is going to be probably pricier. But sometimes if you're able to give a month of delay, or even a month and a half to 2, that's when these kind of niche opportunities can open up and you might find yourself with a deal. So I have a few peers that have opted to go that route where they kind of pump the brakes a little and they were able to find better deals waiting a month or 2.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And this question here was posted in YouTube and is addressed to Zachary, but I'm going to ask it to the whole group as it's something I've actually seen quite a bit through the forums. At business school, do you have to wear suits all the time? Do you have to look like a typical MBA person coming in and looking professional at all times? Do these applicants need to go out and make sure that their wardrobe is up to snuff, or what have you seen?
Since this one was addressed to me, I'll take it first. And it's funny because I asked the same question at my first meeting. I was like, do I need a suit? And they looked at me and they're like, yes. But the truth was, I never needed a suit. So I think it depends on what you're recruiting for. I will say that if you're going for some of the more institutional pipelines, such as consulting, but again, to specifically investment banking, there are expectations for what your appearance looks like. And then if you're planning on attending a lot of networking events. So long story short, I think it would be a good move to have one on hand at least.
Yeah, and I'd echo Zach's comment there. Certainly, do you need one for the MBA? There's case competitions, presentations, and for those key networking events where you're meeting lots of people, it's a requirement to wear a suit. So it's not all the time, but for a lot of these events, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So I was going to say one last thing to address women, since I think it's different for guys where you can maybe just use one suit for every single thing that you need to do, or a similar looking suit. I think one thing that I was surprised by is just there is a slight difference between your interview clothes, which are the most formal, and between what you might want to wear to networking, coffee chats, and recruiting events, which is a little bit less formal. And that might be just like a really nice shirt and jacket, or a sort of less formal, you can have more color in your clothes for those type of events. And so it's worth it to have one nice interview outfit and then have sort of a suite of a couple nice pieces that you can combine in different ways for the many back-to-back different kinds of coffee chats and recruiting engagements you'll have. I just want to bring that up for women specifically, because I think it would be a nightmare to have to spend every 7 to 9 p.m. every week wearing really high heels and all your makeup and your nice interview clothes. I would find that I think I'd find that frustrating, and that wasn't what happened.
No, that's perfect feedback. Thank you. And I mean, once again, that with the times we're in and the Zoom meetings, I mean, everything is a little bit more up in the air, business up top, party down bottom. So it's no one ends up knowing when you're in a classroom on Zoom. I do want to take this time real quick to make a quick plug to everyone watching. Make sure to join us next week, the GMAT Club next week, for small private meetings with Tuck, Rotman, and others. You'll have a chance to meet with AdCom members face-to-face, which of course means Zoom, and you will be able to sign up in a link that's being posted to the comments now. So there we go. That was my advertisement. But I do also want to talk about some of the other costs, and maybe kind of focusing on what Hendrik was speaking on earlier about the cost of time. And I think Emma even made the comment of FOMO, which I know is one of the, and for those who don't know, FOMO means fear of missing out. I know that's a major concern with MBA programs, because you generally have so many activities that you could invest in, so many clubs that you could join. So how do you choose between the ones that you really enjoy when you only have so much time allotted to you, especially if you're in the heavy, like Zach mentioned, institutionalized recruiting cycles where consulting will take up a decent amount of time, same with IB. So I'd love to hear maybe a little bit from each one of you. how did you decide when going into these programs what clubs were worth your time and investment, and how you kind of allotted that and planned it out?
Yeah, I don't mind taking the start on this one. There's two strategies I've actually heard prior to entering my MBA. One strategy is to try to choose two paths and do them simultaneously. And if one doesn't work out, you kind of go on the other. So you're going for investment banking, and if you're not kind of getting a traction there, you try to pivot to consulting. And the other strategy would be to just focus intensely, go all in on one path. And the latter one is the one I recommend. There's just so many events within the MBA. It's so fast paced. It's so intense that it's really better to focus and go all in on your one career path than just spread yourself thin. Sometimes if you spread yourself thin, you're just not competitive for all those different paths and you end up with nothing. So really how I decided to invest in my activities was I decided to pursue a finance path, and I just, essentially got myself involved in as many things financial as possible. And that helped drastically in securing a position.
Fantastic. And anyone else as well? And even speaking on maybe some of the softer clubs as well, whether you joined a wine tasting group or I know some of the hockey clubs up at Tuck as well. So curious to hear about those clubs as well and how you built those into your time.
I'll go. So one thing that surprised me about the MBA experience versus undergrad was certainly the role of clubs and kind of what they do. And they're each going to have their own design and application, but a lot of times, because I agree wholeheartedly that the biggest constraint on you is time management and the MBA experience. There's going to be so many things offered to you and so many things that you get to do. And so how do you choose? And I think for most people, at least for me, I want to come in with an open mind, try my hand at a few things. But I think what we were saying earlier about having kind of a strategy in place, at least a certain timeline, and tracking those very important recruiting dates for some of, again, the institutional pipelines are probably the ones that come first, and just kind of giving yourself that window to open yourself up to a lot of things. And then, at least for me, it was a transition to really get a lot of freedom in my life. And so, yeah, I mean, you're the captain of your soul or whatever that old adage is. And so embrace that. You'll have a lot of people telling you how you should use your time. Like, you should be in this class, you should be in this club because this is what we need to learn, or this is very important. But the truth is, you're the only one who truly knows what you're after and should be the one actioning that. So I think having faith in your own compass will do you a lot of good, but also that discipline, perhaps via strategy, is so important because there is not enough time to do everything there is in the MBA experience.
Fantastic. I know that's great advice. And Emma, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say what Zach said so resonates with me. I think that when I think about activities, one thing that I've had to learn that has been really important is thinking about not just what is the utility of this activity to the average business school student, but what does this mean to me in general? What am I willing to give up in terms of time and in money in order to have this kind of thing in my life? And I'll say, I think the idea of having a strategy around these are times when I'm going to lean heavily into my recruiting and these are times where I'm going to take a step back is really important, because it's sad going in with recruiting as your only goal and not doing anything, whether it's a wine tasting club or participating in business and politics discussions or playing hockey. Those things enrich your life. They make you a more interesting person. They sustain your reserve to get through the networking events. They give you things to talk about. So I would say, make sure you consider the value to you as a person of doing things that aren't just recruiting related, and then plan your time so that you are respectful of the fact you will have recruiting commitments, and there'll be times where you just really will spend most of your waking day doing that. So that's what I would say in terms of pick the things that have utility to you. Ideally, I like to pick things that give me skill or expertise that I didn't have before. I think that's part of the reason I came to business school. So I've enjoyed joining clubs on topics like digital strategies, where I'm fascinated by it. I don't know a lot. There are people at school who know way more than I do, and I just get to sit there and learn new skills, learn how to use Tableau, learn how to use SQL, and then hear from people that spend a lot of their time in these spaces what it's like.
That's a fantastic point as well. And I'd actually like to build on that a little bit as well in terms of finding clubs that resonate with you. And it's something that I've heard repeated throughout a lot of current and past students is that your second year tends to open up in terms of the time that you have allotted for you to be able to do these types of events, whether that means you already have your return offer from your recruiting, so you don't actually have to recruit anymore. And because of that, you have that free time. Is that something that you've noticed to where you are able to spend a bit more time doing things that you would like rather than things that set you up for the future in your second year, as opposed to maybe what happened in the first year?
I get started off. I think for me, I'm still recruiting, so I'm not getting the nice honeymoon second year of having a lot of time. But I will say I do find myself having more free time, and it kind of builds off what Zach and Emma said, where I have a much easier time saying no to things and realizing what is really aligned with my goals and what is something I actually want to spend time with, and versus something that I just might be signing up to because I'm hoping I'm not missing something on the other end. So I think in my second year, I found it's probably just confidence is probably the right word to just say, these are the events that I want to spend time with. These are the events that I can let go. And then normally with the clubs you're involved in, like from the social side, there might be one or two big events in the semester. So maybe you say, hey, I might skip some of the small weekly events, but if there's a big, well, now there's not as much weekend trips, but say there's a big marquee event of the year, like that's what I'm going to make sure I make time for. And just so you can fit with whatever is your priority.
Very good. Thank you, Hendrik. And then I do see a question here, and I'm not exactly sure what it was aimed at, but I'm going to use it to build my own question from it. But they're asking, what investments did you feel were worthwhile during the application and pre-matriculation journey? And I kind of want to aim it towards, what did you do after you were admitted before matriculation? Is there anything that you did either to prepare yourself for your MBA, or did you use that time to really just relax, maybe travel a little bit more? What would your suggestions be for those maybe in their pre-matriculation journey?
Yeah, I don't mind timing into this one. One thing I did prior to starting my MBA was just beginning networking. I was completely engineering is my background and going a completely different 180 route. And I think it doesn't hurt to start networking early and getting your name out there and meeting people, because it certainly helps in terms of the application process. So that was obviously a significant time investment, right? It was just beginning to network. Yeah.
Fantastic. Zach?
Yeah, I'll add. So part of the MBA, and not to take away from all the people you meet, all the things you get to do, is essentially a value proposition, right? Where you engage a school and you're like, if you give me your brand and your resources, in turn, I'll go do all these great things. And so once you're an admitted student, you have access to that brand, at least at some level. And so the advice that was given to me after I had been admitted was that I could consider doing a pre-MBA internship. And I was surprised to find, and I've learned more about these, that there are actually a lot of companies that have programs specifically targeting pre-MBAs. I'll use it as an example, is there's a Goldman Sachs vet program that's specifically for pre-MBAs. So if you are looking to kind of leverage that, from the onset and turn it into, I would suggest maybe a lighthearted internship, or whatever pace you're at, though, you can do that. And just to give a personal narrative there, I did do that. I took that advice. I, did kind of what Mark said, looked at my network, looked at my smartest friends, and I actually was able to attach to one, which has been my internship from then until now, and will continue to be. So it can work out in your favor, and you can have that honeymoon that Hendrik was referring to, away from recruiting, if you get lucky like I did. So I won't dwell on that, but it can help, and it can give you an edge in the recruiting process if you do continue to use your time wisely. And then the last thing I'll say is, but Emma is so right. Like, you have to action self-care. You have to do what's right for you in all aspects. So.
Fantastic. That's a great answer. And we have 5 minutes left. So I would like to give kind of each person maybe one more statement, if you don't mind, just with any advice that maybe we hadn't touched on, or something that you just kind of want to say to people who are going through the same journey that you went through a year or two ago, and who are trying to self-reflect, trying to build their own brand and show it to these universities? What is something that may not be discussed widely on these schools' websites that you've learned that may help them get that edge, or even just may help them self-reflect better? Because to some people, self-reflection is a bit challenging. So, I mean, I'll just go around, maybe starting with Mark, and if just anything that comes to mind that you just want to give as advice to the people watching.
Sure. So one token advice I could provide is, similar to kind of what Zachary just said, is you can certainly leverage the school's brand and the resources, but I think the one key advice is it's all you. And whatever MBA you choose, it's you, I would say 90% of the time, and the MBA 10% of the time, because it's up to you to network. It's up to you to make those impressions. It's up to you to perform well in academically. And basically an MBA provides like the playground and the infrastructure to kind of get a job, but it certainly is all you to perform. And I think some people go into the MBA with an idea where I just kind of have to show up and I'm going to end up in a dream job. I'm paying all this money for an MBA, and it's just like a process in and out, and you come whatever. But so my token advice is you got to be very cognizant that sure, you're going to a school and you're spending a lot of money, you're going to learn a lot, but it's really you who is going to drive the results, and that should be the expectation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mark. And Emma, I'll toss it to you.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up on that, because I think putting that yourself and your self story at the center of everything that is why you do an MBA and what becomes possible after you do one makes a ton of sense. And so I guess the advice I give can apply both when you're getting ready to apply for business school and then as well after you're there, is to consider your story. I think during the application process, it's very easy to get fixated on the things that are easier to see. Like, these are my numbers, this is my GMAT score, this is my college GPA, this is, the industry that I work in. And especially for career switchers, it's really helpful to think about, this is the unique value that I can provide to the school. This is what I bring to the community, the knowledge and the way that I interact with people. That's the value proposition that you're offering them. Once you get in, the question becomes, given what they're providing to me, what new and different thing will I be able to do with my skills and abilities as a result of being at business school? And that can be very granular in, I'm going to enter this new industry and join this kind of company, or it can be very sort of farther out into the future, like, I want to change the way that we handle hiring people who've been in jail. Like, I've seen both of those as people's goals coming out of business school, and I'm impressed again and again by the thoughtfulness that my classmates put into what they're hoping to achieve. And I think that how you tell your story, who you are, what you bring, and what you're trying to do it will help you get into business school. It'll help you succeed when you're there, and it will help you get the most out of the investment you made once you graduate.
Once again, great advice, Emma. And then Zach, following up on that, I'll give it to you.
Yeah, it sounds like we're kind of all on the same page, and I think most of you grasp what you're getting into here, and it's a lot of fun, and it should also be a healthy amount of work. And so I guess my closing remarks would be like, these can be the best years of your life, and just make sure you're doing the work to make these the best years of your life so far. Set yourself up for success. And so along with that, another shameless plug, if you are a veteran out there, I genuinely would like to talk to you if you have any questions. So please action that link that I think was blasted out earlier. And that's my final comment.
Yeah, there you go. Throw up the banner for you one more time, and it's in the chat box. And I think Zach said you can find it on their website as well. But go ahead and toss it over to you, Hendrik, for the closing remark, and then I'll close us out.
Yeah. No, I there's not really too much I can add. I think everyone did a great job covering it, and so I guess maybe I'd reiterate my one nugget of practical advice in terms of when you are joining clubs and you're trying to balance your time with your personal relationships, and there's a lot of things pulling at you. Remember that each club, there probably is a couple big events, and maybe focus on attending those and putting all your time into that. And then it's the same with recruiting. You have to keep an eye on deadlines and prioritize. Keep in mind what your end goal is, and overemphasize time to that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hendrik. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. I see we do have quite a decent audience right now. I do want to remind everyone that to join us next week, we will be having private meetings with a lot of the top schools. We'll have the AdCom members. I say face-to-face, but once again, it will be through Zoom. And you can sign up in a link that'll be posted to the comments here. So definitely make sure to do that. But once again, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Emma, Zachary, Hendrik. I know that you guys are extremely busy, so thank you for taking time out of your day to come and give us some advice. So we really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys. Okay, we will close off now. So thank you, everyone.